Microscopic Milton is very small indeed. He lives in a clock on the mantelpiece in the parlor of a house that belongs to a lady named Mrs. Witherspoon. No one knows he's there, apart from Milton's friend Douglas, who spends most of his time asleep in front of the fire, and of course, you. Look, it's snowing, said Milton one snowy morning. Isn't it lovely? Let's go outside and play.
Snow is lovely, thought Douglas. It's just a shame that it's so cold and wet.
In the kitchen, Mrs. Witherspoon was making one of her delicious steak and mashed potato pies. "It's no good you looking at me like that," she said as Douglas walked by. "This isn't for you. You're having meaty chunks for dinner."
You don't have to tell me, thought Douglas. I'm beginning to look like a meaty chunk.
"And mind you don't get too cold playing in the snow," she added as Douglas went out into the garden. "I thought you liked meaty chunks," said Milton when they got outside.
I do, thought Douglas, but a dog needs something hot inside him on a day like this.
Milton and Douglas had great fun playing in the snow. But it wasn't long before Douglas began to feel cold and tired, so he decided to sit in the shed for a while and rest. "I know," thought Milton. "I'll make a snow dog and surprise Douglas with it when he comes back." Milton worked very hard, and bit by bit, the snow dog began to take shape. "There," said Milton when he had finished. "It looks just like Douglas," and he ran off to the shed to fetch him. Just then, Mrs. Witherspoon opened the back door and looked out into the garden. "Douglas," she shouted, "time for your... Oh, my goodness! Oh, Douglas, poor dog, you're frozen solid," said Mrs. Witherspoon as she picked up the snow dog and carried it into the house. "Now, you just sit there where it's nice and warm, Douglas," said Mrs. Witherspoon, "while I go and call the vet." Mrs. Witherspoon hurried away. She didn't notice that the snow dog had already begun to melt. In the garden, Milton was very confused. "It was right here," he said to Douglas. "I don't understand it."
Never mind, thought Douglas. Let's go inside and get warm.
Milton went back to his clock, and Douglas sat in front of the fire.
This rug is unusually soggy, he thought.
Just then, Mrs. Witherspoon and the vet rushed in. "There he is," she said. "He was frozen solid, but he seems to have thawed out now." The vet examined Douglas.
He seems perfectly fine now, he said. Just a little bit cold and wet.
Mrs. Witherspoon thanked the vet and showed him to the front door. "What on earth is going on?" said Milton.
I haven't the foggiest idea, thought Douglas,
but he didn't mind. Mrs. Witherspoon let him sleep on the sofa until the rug had dried out, and for supper, she gave him a very large slice of delicious hot steak and mashed potato pie, which he shared with Milton, of course.